Sweet. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to book club again. Today, just like the past other weeks, instead of doing a full book, we're just doing a discussion on a topic. Um, and this topic is that of anti-natalism. For those of you guys who like don't know, this just means like the philosophical position of being against having kids. Because commonly, right, most people say I want to have kids, or having kids is a good thing, a beautiful thing, a morally um, righteous thing to do. It's what we should do. But David Benatar, this philosopher, he makes some arguments that go against these intuitions that everyone has, or that most people have at least. He says it's not necessarily the case that it's good to bring people into existence, to have babies, to have kids. And he had his exposition of this idea in his book, Better Never to Have Been: The Harm of Coming into Existence. And this is like I don't know, I feel like a lot of people have this feeling in like their teenager years maybe, or like in their angsty, like depressive phases, where they're like, I hate you, mom, I wish I was never born. So I feel like it's a topic that people can resonate with somewhat, because at one point or another you probably felt like, better not to have existed. And that's these arguments that he's kind of trying to push forward, not from the perspective of pessimism or of angst or anger, but out of compassion. So it's like a pretty interesting route he takes. But very generally, his argument is that um, coming into existence always involves harm. There will always, whether you like it or not, be harm that comes about if a person is born, whether you like it or not. Life isn't this type of like gift that we always like deem it to be. Sometimes it's more of a curse almost, and that going about willy-nilly, banging like rabbits and then having babies pop out of you left, right, center, that just is not the most moral thing to do. It's not very defensible. It's not the right way to approach. Um, yeah, you're right. Just by the title alone, it seems like yeah, very incredibly edgy. It's funny, even on the preface, I think it says the first line, it's like, I dedicate this book to my parents who brought me into existence without my will or without my consent or something like that. So it does read a little bit like like an edgelord. But yeah, anyways, he comes up with arguments, and he challenges the common intuition of pro-natalism, or of saying that having kids is a good thing, because that is just incredibly ingrained in our society. Wherever you go, having kids is a beautiful thing, a good thing, something you should do. You should have families and so on. So this is his goal. It's to attack this common intuition people have, but defend it from a argumentative point of view and from a philosophical point of view, as opposed to just like a given granted type of thing, a normal intuition people will just not second guess. So his first big argument is this asymmetry, or what he calls the asymmetry argument, and it follows these basic premises. You can disagree with them, but the logic holds here. So premise one is basically absence of pain is good. So whether it is experienced or not, there being no pain is a good thing, across the board, objectively. Absence of pleasure is not bad if no one is deprived of that pleasure. So there being no pleasure isn't always, or isn't ever, a bad thing if there's no one being deprived or taken away of, or taken the benefit of that pleasure away from. Therefore, non-existence avoids harm without depriving pleasure. And then finally, what this just means is that existence entails unavoidable suffering. So whereas most people think about the creation of life in this type of like, oh wow, he's going to have good experiences, or they will have a good life, they will find a lot of pleasures in life, Benatar flips the script and says, why are we only focusing on the good? Why not make an argument for the bad? Um, yes, someone can have good things in their life. Does he define pain? Yeah, he defines pain in any type of psychological distress, physical pain, emotional pain, even spiritual pain. The most broad understanding of pain you can kind of have. Basically, it's not a very like rigid definition, like a very any type of. Why are these premises asymmetrical themselves? That seems catchy. That's a good question. Sorry for not opening mic today. You're good. You're good. Why are premises asymmetric? Well, I think he's saying because the asymmetry comes from the existence of pain being weighed more heavily than the existence of pleasure, or the perception of pleasure. He thinks it matters more the suffering we might deal with than the pleasure we might gain in life. And that's why we should err on the side of caution when it comes to having kids and stuff like that. Find it hard to argue. Peter Singer argument for. Yeah, no, it's terribly hard to logically argue against this because most arguments pro-natalist are either theological ones, intuitive ones, and we'll get into that in the following slides. No king, no pain, basically. But yeah, the conclusion from this asymmetry argument is that non-existence is preferable. There's more weight, argumentative weight, philosophical weight, reasonable weight, rational weight on there being no pain than there being some sort of gain or some sort of pleasure, let's say. He thinks that, well, most people will say, well, life is good. We experience a lot of pleasure. There are so many good things to life. Going out for ice cream or having fun with your friends or a night out, getting married, petting dogs, all this type of stuff. But he thinks that when you ask people and you confront them, you ask them, is your life a good life? Are you having a good time? A lot of biases get in the way of an accurate representation of the quality of life we have. People often tend to skew things positively. Look on the bright side, look at the, glass half full, things like that. And he thinks that these biases sometimes are getting in the way. People will oftentimes overrate the quality of their lives. So, imagine you were like looking at a person's life objectively, third person, you would be like, well, it's kind of a crappy life. But then you ask him, how's your life going? You'd say, no, it's going pretty good, X, Y, Z. Even the best types of lives, the lives of, I don't know, come up with something superficial like the life of a rock star or of the president or of a rich person or of a privileged person. Even those very, very good lives, those very, very privileged lives, they contain significant amounts of suffering, and that's just completely unavoidable. And because of his asymmetry argument, that just means that we should be very, very careful. Even if a life is going to have a lot of pleasure in it, because there's going to be inevitable pain to that life, we need to be apprehensive with bringing that into existence. He measures the goodness of life on three basic, philosophical metrics. One of these is of hedonism, right? The pleasure principle. So, saying what is good is what is most pleasurable. And he kind of thinks that, well, because of these biases that we have, in reality and objectively, in life, there is more suffering than there is pleasure. That's his first, philosophical push. The second one is this desire fulfillment. He thinks that most desires that we have in life, they're never fulfilled. At best, they get warped, or at best, they get convoluted. So, ask a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? He'll probably say great things like, oh, I want to, fly a rocket ship and be an astronaut and be the president of the United States. I want to have 100 kids and pet 20 puppies every day. And then as we grow up, we kind of start to shift these goals a little bit. It's like, no, you know what? Maybe I'll just be happy with a house. Okay, maybe the house is not possible. I'll just be happy with an apartment. So the things we aim for in life, or the desires we have, we start off in life, they start to kind of warp, and we start to malform them as a way of coping with the fact that we're not going to get those things. The final philosophical metric he's trying to judge the quality of life on is this objective list theory. And that's very similar, I think, to the desire fulfillment, but whereas desire is based on things we will immediately get pleasure from, the objective list theory kind of aims at goals that you have in your life. And most goals that people have in their lives aren't ever achieved. I want to be a millionaire. I want a loving family. I don't want to be sick. I don't want to feel pain. I just like things that you want your life to look like in like a perfect world. None of those, very, very few times do people achieve these eudaimonia or eudaimonia or whatever as the Greeks called it, like this enlightenment. So that's his other main point in the book. Then he kind of starts to attack the central intuitions of the pronatalists, and that says, well, where are you getting the claim that it is morally good to have kids? How do you back that up? Where does it say? What piece of paper, what Bible are you pointing to, or are you looking at that says you should have kids in a normative sense? He thinks that this right to procreate, you know, is oftentimes it's kind of like brought up out of thin air. The reasons that we have this idea that we should be procreating are just cultural, ingrained in us. Let's say. He also makes this claim where you'll oftentimes hear parents say, "I want the child to have a good life," but this completely presumes the existence of that child. The child doesn't exist yet. It's like you're talking about the pleasure a being can have before it's even brought into existence. No benefit can be conferred onto a non-existing entity. So it's not really about whether a child would prefer that type of existence. It's more about the harm of any type of existence coming up. So he's just like reiterating himself a little bit. And he makes some extremely radical, or he takes some radical positions here that will grind a lot of people's gears or just like make you cringe a little bit. But he has this, some people call it the pro-death view. So you've heard like abortionists, there's like pro-life and not, but he has this pro-death view. He thinks that it is morally correct to have abortions. Why? Well, because this prevents beings from experiencing pain and suffering. He says that, well, fetuses are not fully formed humans. They lack the things that make them moral or completely holistically sentient beings, things like having interests and advanced preferences, advanced cognitive abilities, advanced nervous systems to feel like physiological pain. All of these types of things, they're not fully formed, and if we just cut life off before it even starts to like blossom, then we can avoid a lot of the suffering that life will inevitably experience. So abortion is a moral good in lots of contexts. Maybe not in all of them, but in lots of them. And he's taking a pretty strong stance here, which is unconventional, and a lot of people object to, and have this like immediate reaction to. He thinks that another claim that most angsty teens will have, or like a lot of anti-human sentiment can be like shared with, is this idea that like, okay, well, people should just like no longer exist. We should just like wipe out the human race, stop having kids, and in doing so we can prevent human suffering. And you can be a little tangential with that and say, well, like if all the humans disappeared, then a lot of other types of suffering, like animal suffering and environmental suffering, all those types of things can also be mitigated. He favors phased extinction over sudden population. So he's not just saying like, okay, nuke everything right now so that no more people can experience pain in the future. He's just saying that maybe we should stop having kids slowly, so that our species can stop experiencing pain, stop having to experience pain. And this is one way of kind of dealing with Parfit's dilemmas or Parfit's paradoxes, which are these thought experiments geared towards like explaining why certain populations, why we should have in growing populations, how we should treat populations, and the ethics behind all that type of stuff. So one of these Parfit's paradoxes is like, okay, take this is an example basically. So a couple can conceive a child now who will have serious but survivable genetic conditions. So they're just like, imagine a baby's going to be born with some certain type of disorder. Or they can wait for a little bit and then conceive a happy kid, healthy kid later. If they'd waited, though, that specific child that would have had those disorders or those ailments would have never existed. So can the child born with those ailments say, well, you harmed me by creating me? Parfit would say, no, because it's better to exist with these types of ailments than to not exist. So this is like the opposite of what David Benatar is saying. He says that non-existence is preferable if there's suffering. Parfit says even existence where you're suffering is preferable to non-existence. Another one is like, take two types of possible worlds, right? You have world A, where there's a billion people, all of them are living optimally good lives, so everyone has their needs met. They're all like, drinking wine and having a good time, partying, happy, everyone's super healthy, everyone has friends, just like great all around. 1 billion of these people. Imagine world Z from a utilitarian standpoint. Imagine world Z, it has 100 billion people. However, each of these people, they're living like at the threshold of what it's worth to be alive at, or like what the threshold of like life being worth living. Like life contains a lot of suffering, but sometimes it's like just good enough for you to want to keep living. It's like, yeah, maybe life sucks a bit, but it's just good enough, I will keep going. This world has 100, so like 100 times more people. According to utilitarianism, since there are so many other people here, wouldn't you say that there's like more overall happiness? It's like a weird bullet to bite, or like a repugnant, he calls it like a repugnant thing to say. How could a world full of almost like misery, of like minimal happiness, be better than a world with like a lot less people but having a great time? Objections and clarifications. This is where most people will put their foot down and say, okay, Benatar, cool little thought experiment. I'm not vibing with it too much though, because, well, one, it's completely counterintuitive. Benatar would answer pretty simply and pretty soundly, I would think, in saying that, well, we shouldn't derive oughtness from intuitions. We shouldn't develop philosophical frameworks or philosophical arguments just because they rub us the wrong way. If you want to be a genuine philosopher, you want to seek the truth, and the truth isn't always intuitive. So he says, swipe that objection off. We don't want to deal with that. The second one, okay, but people enjoy life. Ask anyone on their deathbed if it would have been better for them to have existed versus not, and they're going to say, no, I would have rather existed. Benatar would probably reply in saying, well, they have a distorted view of what it means to have a good life, or distorted view of how much suffering they've actually had to endure versus all of the pleasure they've gained from it. I would kind of, raise my hand here and say a little bit like, well, does it really matter? As long as they're perceiving their lives as worth living, isn't that just good enough? I don't know. Is he advocating suicide? Absolutely not. This is one part where people get Benatar very wrong. They think that what he's saying is everyone should go around willy-nilly slicing their necks. But he's not saying that. He's just saying we should be a lot more careful in having kids, and it's morally preferred just to not have kids. But once we exist, there's no reason to go around killing yourself. Once we exist, there's nothing we can do about it. We're already existing. The best thing we can do is make our lives as pleasurable as possible, and try and reduce the suffering of ours and others as most as possible. Is this a misanthropy? So is he doing the opposite of philanthropy? And he would say, well, absolutely not. His whole argument is coming from a place of trying to help out the most people and trying to reduce the most amount of suffering. It's not coming from a point of like, everyone shut up, life sucks, pessimism. He's trying to, be charitable. Let's say that's what he would say, at least. And the last objection, one that I don't think he would have any solid answers to, is the theological arguments for why it's morally correct to have kids and all that. So as a quick little summary, whatever. He says anti-natalism is something that is motivated from the reduction of suffering, not really from the hatred of life or from the hatred of existence. It's more about kind of considering, I'm not sure if he fully endorses this side, but what he does say is like, let's consider the alternatives to the commonly held view that it's okay to have kids. Anyways, that was the short little expo on that. So I'll stop sharing my screen. And anyone, would you guys like to butt in? That was a lot of me talking.
I just want to make sure I understand this right. I was reading it as you were talking, so I don't know if I missed some of the reading or I missed some of you talking. So, to my understanding, he's in the most charitable light. He's saying that if you bring someone into existence, even if their life is like mostly pleasure, they still never got the ability to consent to the good of life. It's like it would be akin to like me punching you in the face and then giving you like $10,000. We would still say that's wrong, even if it's like net good, because that's suffering that we should avoid. And then I for the asymmetry argument, it's just that like pain is still we in general we prefer to avoid. We have okay. Sorry, I gotta rephrase this. We morally oblige ourselves to avoid pain. We don't usually morally oblige people to like provide pleasure to people. We don't like we're not pro pleasure as much as we are anti pain in society. Like we wouldn't say that you have to go around providing people pleasure in any form. Um, but we would probably say that like if someone is like actively suffering in front of you, like let's say, you know, the Peter Singer example, a baby's drowning in a fountain, that you would have a moral obligation to pull them out. And I guess the argument goes that you're kind of doing that, you're causing the pain with the baby. Would that be a fair representation?
Yeah, I think you have a pretty good read on it. It's a focus on reducing pain as opposed to kind of adding pleasure to the world. We're always focused on like what is my duty to do good to make people happy and stuff. He says no, our duty is to reduce the most amount of suffering because suffering is a lot more messed up. Um, on like the I don't know the valence spectrum of human experience than pleasureful things.
And then for the suicide stuff, just from like skimming it, he seemed to be saying like, oh, ceasing to exist is like an unvariable like harm, and we should always avoid to cease to exist. But like, if we can avoid coming into existence, that's good. So like obviously he says death is bad. Okay,
Yeah, that's how I understand it at least. But yeah,
solid.
I think there's kind of like a twofold objection to the problem. One is that I think there still exists. All he's concerned about is the sort of like calculus of suffering versus happiness, and he weighs, let's say, suffering 2 to 1 in comparison to happiness. There still exists a state of affairs wherein which you could guarantee an absolute hedonic life. So imagine the life of a billionaire, right? Given the technology of now, you give them they can have a kid with CRISPR, guarantee no birth defects, no medical ailments, top-notch medical care, in a billion of dollars of money to spend however they like. They can live a life of absolute pure hedonism. And so, if there exists a state of affairs where you can guarantee someone's full like a full hedonistic lifestyle, then there exists some births that ought to occur and some births that ought not to occur. And I think the second objection I have is that given that consideration, I think you could say that uh, you sort of have this dichotomy where in the state of non-existence you never have the choice to be brought into existence, or to stay or to I guess resume your non-existence. But if you come into the world, you always have the choice. You can do your best to lead a life that is full of hedonism, but if the suffering is too great, you can always take the like commit suicide and return to non-existence. So there's that sort of calculus where um, if we do grant that there is a potentiality of living a life that does bring soul happiness, we can do our best to live that life of full happiness. But if we grant that the suffering is too great, we can return to the state of affairs which he sees as greater of non-existence.
I would respond to the first point you bring up. I think that he would say that it's necessarily the case that human existence or a human life will entail some degree of suffering, no matter the state of affairs that you can bring about. Even this billionaire with his CRISPR genetic kid and like a perfect everything, the kid's still gonna get angry at his parent or like get a paper cutter. It's just like a part of human life to suffer. There's no way around that. But to the other point, yeah,
I think
I do get that.
if he weighs like there still has to be some value that he attaches to suffering and happiness, in the sense that it would be, I think, it would be wrong to say that any amount of suffering outweighs any amount of happiness. Say, like, if I get a paper cut, that suffering, it outweighs the most hedonistic life that someone could lead. And so with the billionaire example, um, the amount of hedonism that you can experience with $32 billion is going to outweigh whatever possible suffering. Even if that person just spent their entire life hooked on ketamine, fent, some Molly, and they were just fed walking all over the place, the literal hedonism, the dopamine rush, will outweigh just about every negative experience they have. Like, that's the point with having this sort of perfect $1 billion lifestyle, is that you can lead such a hedonistic lifestyle that it will outweigh the suffering.
I think his response to that would be that could be the case, right? But, well, one, we don't have foreknowledge of the future, of how things end up unfolding, and then two, that individual was never consented to existence. So, like, you even have examples of, like, rich billionaires which are living those lives, but they end up having an absolute crash because of all this, pleasure they're getting. They end up just, like, in the dumps, and they would have rather not existed at the end of the day. He just thinks that when people have a kid, they're rolling a dice and saying, okay, well, maybe it's going to be a good number, but they can never know for sure any parameters they give that kid if it's going to have a worthwhile life. I think that's, like, the push. Would anyone else have some objections?
I have a question.
I think that can you hear me? If you can't hear me clearly, but no, still no. You can't hear me.
Not really. Your mic's very
No,
scratchy.
it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. I'll talk about it in the chat.
Okay, great. Go for it.
I have another question. How do you think David Benatar would feel about Aldous Huxley's Brave New World? Is that a dignified world for him, a world that minimizes suffering?
Fill me in.
They have their own drug, the soma, which is non-addictive and minimizes pain and maximizes pleasure, for instance.
I don't know. I don't know how he would respond.
So it's intellectually, it's a dystopic world, but it's a world that minimizes suffering.
Mm-hmm. It's hard even if you minimize suffering, so long as there's the possibility of substantial suffering, even if that possibility is minimized and mitigated, then I think David Benatar would still say that it would be immoral to bring about a being without consent into that world. Unless you have a guarantee that their life is going to be better, then it's immoral. But I'm not sure, to be honest, how to answer that.
I mean, sure, I agree. He would still be anti-natalist on that world, but what I'm questioning is that from his premises, it would appear that the world in Brave New World is a good world. So I'm questioning the premises based on that ground.
Would he say it's a good world or a better world than this one?
So I think his premises would say that Aldous Huxley's world, the Brave New World, is better than our world due to the minimization of suffering. So from the premises alone.
The asymmetry argument?
So that's what I'm at. I think, yeah, I think that those will be it.
Yeah, because I think it's not about the minimization or maximization of suffering in this argument. That's the argument behind hedonism or utilitarianism. It's about the absence of pain or absence of pleasure, like the zero, the zero-ness or existence, not exactly like the amounts. But I think he would for sure say that world is better, far better than this one. I think Tegso, you wanted to say something, or you had your hand up earlier? Maybe you said something in the chat. Let's see. like I want to do like a vote or a poll. I want to see if we have any anti-natalists. Let's see. That's either anti-natalist or
I think the largest assumption though he's making is that people would share that asymmetry with suffering and suffering and pleasure. I think as abstract concepts, I think people will generally view them one to one. In practice, I think it'd be hard to say, like 3 paper clips equal 1 beer type of thing. But I think the sort of hard abstraction to say that it is asymmetrical is an intuition that people aren't going to share. And so if they don't share those premises, they're not going to reach the same conclusion.
yeah.
I also think I remember in his there's a point he makes something about how like the intuitive view of the existence of rational beings being good. I think there is something to be said. I mean, I've gotten into this with other people on server a bit about just like you are going to, out of these moral qualitative claims, you're always going to resort back to an intuition. And fundamentally, the source of these arguments is there's always going to be an intuition as the backbone. And if you don't share that intuition, the argument's just not going to be compelling. And so, like earlier when you were saying about things, like if I take a third person objective view to someone's life and I say it's crap, there are still underlying subjective intuitions from which I evaluate those points. It's similar to the distinction of like science will tell us what is the case, not what ought to be. So these intuitions have to come from some sort of subjective evaluation. They cannot come from an objective frame point.
I agree with what Daniel said, but I just wanted to pop in to say that it is probably an intuition, but I think I share the intuition. Like I don't think that you're morally compelled to create pleasure in the world, but like we do see that there's definitely an asymmetry in terms of pain and pleasure. Like I am not obliged to provide pleasure to you, to like buy you a cake, to buy you a smoothie, to like give you a blowjob. I'm not obliged to do any of these things. But in terms of pain, I'm definitely obliged to not stab you. I'm definitely obliged to that if you're like, let's say, drowning in a pool right next to me and I'm the only person that can help, I probably should help you out. There's definitely an asymmetry there for me, but again, I acknowledge that some people don't share that intuition. But for me, it's a lot harder. I just wanted to put in that if you're gonna put in the pool, can you put in like a not sure option? Because I haven't
No,
thought
I
enough
like
about
I
this.
like the
And,
forcing someone. I love pigeonholing, like forcing you to make a choice.
True, base, Daniel. Everybody's forced to give each other blowjobs. Base. All right. Thank you.
But I have a question. Where does this obligation to not stab someone come from? Is this like a deontological
As Daniel
obligation
said,
or?
no, it's Daniel's right. Everything's emotivism. Philosophy is vibes. It's an intuition.
Interesting.
Well, I want to make clear. I think this is distinction between the emotivist point and the sort of intuition point is that emotivism is more so in regards to you are expressing a disposition with when you make a moral what with seemingly a moral statement. It's a disposition to say like most people will say boo boo murder type of thing. Whereas the intuition point is more so just to say that you have these sort of intuitive metrics, these qualitative judgments, and based on those qualitative judgments, when you make a seemingly moral proposition, you're simply referring to if the state of affairs obtains or does not obtain with those sort of evaluative statements.
I'm trying to figure out where I derive my duty to not have someone stabbed, or to like stop a stabbing. I mean, where that comes from, if it's not a theological one. Giancarlo, I'm interested to hear what you say. Why stop a stabbing?
Wait, what? Why?
Why should you stop someone from being stabbed?
Wait, did I say that?
No. I'm asking you like we all have that the intuition, like if we see someone drowning, we should go help them, right? Or if we see someone suffering, we should stop that suffering. But why do we have, well, one I guess would be like, why do we have that feeling? And if we have that feeling, where does it come from? Because a lot of people, the strongest place that I can think of would be a religious, or a divine or a higher order type thing.
Well, I don't think we can objectively construct, objectively make life sacred, but we have an inclination to not kill.
Okay, I have
But I don't think it's objective.
Huh. Not objective. Interesting. Here, Emorph has a question. Okay, suppose he is right. Why just stop having kids? Why not detonate all bombs at once and be done with it? Nobody would feel a thing. A bomb everything movement should be started. Okay. Otherwise, aren't we truly just being angsty edgelords? Good question. He would respond in saying that, like, there's two prongs to his whole like anti-natalist movement. One is coming into being without consent, and then the other one is preventing future suffering. If we're already in existence, there's no more consenting we can do. We were just brought up into this. We can still experience pleasure, and we still have the moral obligation to reduce the suffering of anyone else and increase the pleasure of anyone else. He's not like neglecting pleasure as a good thing. So what would happen if we detonated the bomb? Hard to say, but I think he would just be saying like we're neglecting any possible pleasure in the future, and the type of suffering we should focus on is the suffering that comes about through bringing a person into existence, not the suffering that will come about from someone just merely already existing, I think.
My girlfriend has a point.
I was gonna say that I'm Daniel using a voice changer, but I guess I can't. But anyway, just a quick question on the consent point. So he says that we can't defer like suffering or pleasure onto something that doesn't exist. But in the same way, can't we also not expect consent or not consent from something that doesn't exist? So is that kind of a null point then of there being or not being consent from being brought into existence because you weren't existing in the first place? So you weren't in a position to consent or not consent.
Yeah, it's like a non-existent thing cannot consent, just by virtue of being non-existent. So it's a weird thing, I feel like he makes a jump there. I'm not sure how he would answer. That's a good question.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know how he'd answer that, because it's like, I feel like it's kind of like you can have either or. Either you can defer the pleasure onto a non-existing thing or the suffering onto a non-existing thing, and you can also then have the consent or non-consent to the non-existing thing, or you can't, in which case I think the consent point just falls in the water. And then he can only have that other point of reducing suffering to support his argument.
Hello?
I can hear you, yeah.
Oh, thank the Lord. Oh, God. Sorry, my mic was broken. I thought somebody's trolling me. Yes. Sorry, because I didn't speak for a while. I have 4 short things I want to say. Very short.
Go for it.
First thing, responding to a person who said about Brave New World, it's a great novel. I would say David Benatar would be in favor of New London and the model of existence, because it was genetically pre-engineered to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. Because unfortunately, Mr. Benatar views pain and pleasure in this very cold binary that pleasure is bad and that pleasure is good and pain is bad. Which is, I'm sorry, it still is a goo gaga understanding of what pain is. Everything you do for pleasure will include pain. This isn't inevitable. And some pain is actually quite good. What of the people who enjoy pain, who see pain in pleasure, and vice versa? Even the hedonists thought that desire really means something once you devote pain to it. This is an actual fact, goes as old as the hedonist school and the Epicurean school. So I'm sorry, his argument, he's very simplistic. It kind of flattens, one-dimensionalizes the human experience. Second thing I want to say is I'm going to go back to Kant, which might anger some people, I know. Kant is very cold morally, but I would say his moral acts, moral
maxim of universal will makes perfect sense here, because human beings should not be the problem, should be the end. And if by removing humans, if that's the solution to the problem, that would just contradict the maxim, which I believe we should help humans. We should try our best to minimize senseless, meaningless suffering, but the solution should not require the removal of humans themselves. Third thing I want to say is the issue with the asymmetry problem, specifically that the absence of pain or the absence of pleasure, this that cannot be empirically justified, because again, this is a very famous objection. You cannot make any statement of consent or will or anything to a non-living, non-existing entity, a state before existence. The preface is hilarious. I thank my mom. I dedicate this to my mom and dad, even though they harm me by bringing me without my consent. My consent? What's the my here? You were not even a you. What's There's no my here. The first step to your existence was your parents' procreation. So even sitting and making 5 books, dedicating your career on anti-natalism is a logical contradiction itself. I'm sorry, because it, and this is the thing. Um, so last thing I want to say was um, last thing. Okay, actually, you know what? Sorry, that's the thing I want to say. Sorry.
Anyone want to respond to that before I do?
Oh yes. Oh my God. Sorry. Fourth thing I want to say. Yes, I'm so sorry.
Go
I'm so
for it.
sorry. You had a poll. It's anti-natalist versus natalist. The natalist position, like anti-natalism, makes some sense as a philosophical position. Pro-natalism makes no sense to me. To be pro-procreation, what does that mean? Like you walk in the street and go, "Hey guys, procreate, procreate, procreate," or like maximize procreate. It doesn't. It like seeing a moral issue with procreation itself might have some. You could have some leading case to defend your position against procreation, but to defend your position for procreation makes sense. So I think the best poll would be anti-natalism and anti-natalism, if you know what I mean. But yeah, no, it's not a thing as like two negatives cancel. No, it's not like it's going to become natalism. It's just going to become against Benatar's anti-natalism. Thank you.
I don't think well, just on the last thing you said really briefly, I don't think natalism posits yes, have as many kids as possible, go go go, like everyone bang like rabbits. It's simply saying that it's morally better to have kids than to not have kids. And since no one can kind of have a kid, you either have a kid or you don't have a kid. You cannot have a kid. You kind of have to like choose a side, whether or not you're going to have kids or whether or not you're not going to have kids. And that's what the natalist position is kind of saying. They're not saying yes, have as many kids as possible. It's just that it's more morally uh, reasonable to create life that can experience pleasure than to deny the possibility of pleasure through creating life. But yeah.
Um, yeah, but just a little thing there. Both positions, if you really dive deep into their intuitions, are paradoxical and frankly quite false. You just cannot make a moral statement on something that doesn't exist. Whether it's better to make kids or not, that specifically refers to any agent in this situation. The agent in the situation will be the parent or the person who can't have the ability to procreate. But the person who is about to become existent or whatever has no agency in the situation. So the issue is that with both the positions of natalism and anti-natalism, you cannot make a moral judgment for a non-existent being. I think it boils down to this. And this is practically the issue of many of his arguments and like his
Well, those
ex-
are some debates in metaphysics and ontology right now in philosophy. So like, are hypotheticals real? Right? Do they have any type of ontological legitimacy? If you say that they do, then Benatar's argument holds some weight because possibilities in the future, possible outcomes, they are real, so we can talk about them. That's how we're talking about them. Some say they're absolutely or something else, right? They're like immediate instantiations of mental events or pictures or like images or something going on in our heads, so it doesn't matter. We don't need to concern ourselves with them because the future doesn't matter. Benatar isn't talking about. I mean, he's talking about possible things in the future, and a lot of people agree that possible things in the future are something that are philosophically ontological, maybe not ontological in like this world, like as real as like this pen, but they still hold some level of like reality or of realness. But it's a good point.
I agree. I really do. It's just it's a moral hypothetical. And this kind of limits it from an ontological hypothetical, because speculative theory doesn't go as far as like ethics, for example. Ethical speculative theory that still requires an empirical grounding in some sense. There is no empirical grounding for humans, at least, on non-existent agents. We only are empirically grounded as what is considered ethical or not is for agents who can experience pain or pleasure, what have you. So this is the issue. I forgot his name. Mr.
Benatar,
Anti-Natalist. Benatar. He would go, okay, but this I start with speculative theory. I start with that hypotheticals hold some real truth. Sorry, sir, your hypothetical is a moral one. So that only it holds out truth only if the agent is existent. It's immediately limited. It's the difference between ontological and ethical hypotheticals. Yeah.
I think, but okay, let me ask you this question. Let's say you have two worlds. One where you're a family who, relatively upper class, a net worth of like 50 million. You live in Switzerland. You have wealth, whatnot, and you're deciding on whether or not you're going to have a kid, right? Or you're going to consider the potentiality of your kid's well-being in the future into that decision, versus the second world where if you live in like the trash hills of the Philippines and the last 3 kids you've had have died of cancer, you're going to consider the potentiality of the well-being, assuming you're rational being and you care about this stuff. You're going to consider the rational well-being of that child and into whether or not you're going to choose to procreate in this instance. And so in that sense, I think like that is all. When you say like that's a moral proposition, that's all that it's concerned with. You're sort of concerned with the well-being of this potential rational agent. I think you're right to say in that there is some issue with the empirical worth of these non-existent rational agents, in the sense that we cannot judge their consent because the consent requires that rationality. But you can look at the potentiality of well-being of rational agents and make these sort of judgments based on those factors.
Hello? Can I respond to that? Yes. So, okay, you raise a good point, but here's my issue with it. I'm not trying to be contrarian. Again, I'm trying to concede and also debate. The thing is, this is important. Potentiality is still not an empirically grounded observation you can make because nobody knows the future or fate. This is also an issue if you look at his arguments, for example, that everybody, let's say, like the objective list theory, everybody has an optimism bias in their lives. All human agents have, they view their lives subjectively better than how it's objectively measured. But this is the issue. But you cannot measure two things. You cannot measure what will occur to your future grandchildren, children, or whatever. There's no empirical way to measure that. Time travel doesn't exist. And secondly, you cannot make an objective measurement of what is purposeful or is meaningful to somebody's life. That must come from the agent themselves, only after they're born. So to make any moral judgment, to make any moral case, whether there's more pain than pleasure, or subjective or objective, you must have the agent be born in the first place. And so my issue with anti-natalism is that its assumptions are fundamentally null. They're vacuously true. I can say anything what the non-existent being before the fetus like or not like. It's all speculative. And this is the issue. So what I'm saying here is that to be born is the first step, and then we can yeah. Maybe I'm not very clear.
Let me ask you a quick question.
One of the
Oh, sorry, Daniel, go for it.
I'll be trying to be quick. I think you're thinking of this in too strictly in a binary sense, where there is a sort of spectrum of possibility. Insofar as we don't operate on complete certainty. We operate in the sense of probabilities. When you wake up the next day and you drive to work, you're making the assumption that you're most likely going to get to work safe. You're probably not going to get in a car crash, or but or at the very least, you acknowledge that there's a possibility that you get in a car crash, right? You don't operate it in a binary where it's like I have to be absolutely certain that I will not get in a car crash to get in this car and then go to work. And so similarly, like when you're talking about having kids, you can look at for the history of your genealogy. You can look at your income status, where you live, your passport. You can look at all these things that are predictors of well-being and of likelihood of success for a child. And you can say, well, there's a high probability that this child will be good or bad. And then when you get to the value calculus, I agree with you. They're entirely like these intuitive, subjective values. But there are some things to say. There's something to say about me and you. Me and, for example, my neighbor. We grew up in similar towns. We went to similar education, similar cultural exposure. So we're likely to share some qualitative pillars. In the same sense as like, if I'm going to have a kid, they're likely to share some qualitative pillars to me. It's possible that they diverge in some significant ways, but I can make adaptations as they grow up to accommodate that divergence. So I think the point here is just that if we move away from the binary model and we look at a probabilistic model of percentages, we can start to make these sort of we can start to make these decisions based on that, to say there's a 60%, there's a 70% chance that this kid's born, lives a good quality of life, and that he's probably going to share some of the values that I have in regards to quality of life. And because of those predictive factors, I can take every step I have to improve their quality of life. And the second component is just that because I have these predictive quality factors, I can make judgments based on their quality of life and based on how they're probably going to enjoy that life. As only insofar as I can actually become educated on these outcomes.
Hello? Yes, sorry. Yes. I agree. I actually agree, and I think this is fundamental to human experience and human life throughout history. You can look at this from a historical lens as well, which is why cultures have, and also practically any social intelligent creature have in their minds and also in their social societal spheres have made certain mechanisms or if you want not plans but certain ways to adapt to this probability of suffering or not, to so that there's a sort of sense of responsibility in bearing children and raising them well and having a good life. This is something that's innate in most human cultures. So what I'm trying to say here is that Benatar's